attacks on us, the human beings, which is Allah's best creation, right, is to make us forget our purpose, right? And He does this by also attacking our value, because we cannot have purpose unless we have value. And Allah already told us that we have purpose, and He told us we have value. He said, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, right? That we have honored the children of Adam, both men and women. So Allah already gave us this inherent value that nobody can take away from us, just because He gave us a ruh, right? Just because Allah, like when Allah gives you honor, nobody can take it away, right? And when Allah just decides to dishonor you, then nobody can give you honor. So shaitan, he attacks our psychology by constantly reminding us about how we're not enough, right? And what that does is that it makes us ungrateful to Allah. Because if you think you don't have something, you're more likely to keep thinking about it, right? It's easier to be ungrateful than it is to be grateful. So that's the cycle it takes you on. And then in the same ayah, we also ask Allah, protect us from the torment of the fire, right? We're praising Allah for creating everything in His perfection, and then we're also asking Him to protect us from the fire. So one of the questions that comes up that we can ask ourselves as a question for personal reflection is that how can I respond to difficulty in a way that is pleasing to Allah, right? This is based on some of the previous hikams about basically knowing Allah through hardship, right? We talked about how hardship is one of the easiest doors through which we can know Allah. So in light of that, how can we like look at our own responses when we're going through something and be like, okay, Allah might be taking something away from me, but what is He actually giving me instead? Because Allah is always giving something, right? Even for like the worst of the worst things that could happen to somebody, let's say someone went broke, they lost their job, they lost somebody to death, right? They're still actually gaining something in that moment if they pay attention, right? And the two responses of a believer are you either have sabr or you have shukr, right? So you're always winning, essentially. As long as you have the correct response, you're always winning. So whenever you feel like there's a lack in your life, like I'm lacking something within myself, I'm lacking something in my life, like material thing, or even like something felt like you feel like you're lacking love, or you feel like you're lacking appreciation, what is Allah giving you in replacement of that, right? Because we all have certain things we don't have, but Allah never leaves all of us like completely empty, where we don't have the things that we need within us to keep moving forward in life. So I had this chart, and it was like such an amazing chart, but I can't show it here. So basically, like the scenario is that somebody has fallen into sin, right? Like you've fallen, let's say if even a kaba'ir, right? Somebody has fallen into a major sin. Now, the default response that most people go through if they haven't learned or if they're not very close to Allah, the default response is they turn away from Allah. Because what does guilt naturally do? Guilt makes you ashamed. Like if the guilt stays inside of you for too long, then it turns into shame, right? And what is the difference between the two? So guilt basically says, I did something bad, right? Whereas shame is like, I am bad. Right, so it's not uncommon for Muslims to say like, I'm a bad Muslim because I committed X, Y, Z. So that guilt became shame because you didn't deal with it in the right way, and now you decreased your good deeds, right? Like if you were trying to like wear hijab, now you stopped. If you were coming to the masjid, you stopped because you're like, I'm not deserving of this. I'm not deserving of Allah's mercy. So your sin became the reason for you to move away from Allah. Right? And this is like a person who has a weaker intention. They have a weaker resolve in a way. So like shaitan is working overtime on this person, right? Because when you fall, when you commit a sin, it's not like we're having technical difficulties, so there's nothing over there. So when you commit a sin, right, this is an opportunity for shaitan, right? Because you can go either one of two ways. Either you're going to get closer to Allah, or you're going to get farther away from Allah. So the default response of people is that they're actually going to move away from Allah. And this is the shame that's in them. Like, I can't go back to Allah after what I did. Like, I don't deserve Allah's mercy. So they think they're doing something good, but actually they're cutting themselves off from the only one who could have helped them get out of the sin, right? So what can we do instead? Right? Because that's the default response. We don't want to fall into the default response. Like when we fall, we don't want to just keep falling, right? And going back the wrong way. So our response would be like an informed response. Like, okay, what do I really want to do? What do I actually intend to do? Like now that I fell, do I want to stay there? Right? Like this sin can open the doors to more sin. right? Because that's how sins work. You open one door, then you open another door. So you have to make a choice at that moment. Okay, what is the next step? And that next step is the most important step you take after you fall. So the first thing you do is you turn to Allah, right? In Surah Al-Imran, Allah talks about the ayah where He says the believers are those who, when they fall, they remember Allah. As soon as they commit a sin, they remember Allah. And He's not describing just any random person. He's describing the muttaqun, right? The people we think, like in our mind, when we think of somebody having taqwa, we might think of somebody who's always right? Who's always perfect. We might think of somebody who doesn't fall, who doesn't make mistakes. But Allah literally says, when the, I even forgot the wording, it was like, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً, something like that, right? Like they commit a fahisha, they committed something really disgusting, they committed a sin. These are the muttaqun. They committed something really, really bad. And then they immediately turn to Allah. That's their response. That's what separates the people of taqwa from the people who don't have taqwa. It's not that you don't ever fall. It's that you choose to come back to Allah almost immediately, right? And this description of the one who turns to Allah is also applied to Ayyub alayhi salam. Right? Ayyub alayhi salam was a prophet who was extremely, like he was sick, right? He was sick for a long period of time, like several years. He was sick and he endured the sickness. He didn't even feel, like he felt shy to even ask Allah to cure him of his sickness. And Allah describes him as an excellent slave. Right? He was somebody who was always turning back to Allah. So it's a quality of the prophets to always be turning back to Allah. And then the second thing what you have to do is that you increase good deeds. So you work against what your mind is telling you to do, right? Because your immediate response is, I committed a sin, who am I to commit good deeds now? But the Prophet ﷺ himself told us to do the opposite, right? As soon as you commit a sin, you go and commit a good deed, right? So you make tawbah, and then you cancel out the sin with the good deed. So the hadith itself, he says, the Prophet ﷺ says, number one, fear Allah wherever you are. That's the default. Like, you're just existing. How should your state of existence be? That is that you should be aware of Allah's gaze upon you. Fear Allah wherever you are. Like, be aware of Allah wherever you are. Good situation, bad situation, you're with people, you're alone, you feel like you're mentally okay, you feel like you're not okay. Whatever situation, condition you find yourself in, don't forget about Allah. Remember that He's watching you. Remember that He's with you. Be conscious of His presence, right? That's number one. If you commit a bad deed, right, follow up a bad deed with a good deed and it will erase it. So He's giving you the immediate steps to rectification. Like, okay, if you fall, like, what should you do immediately? Turn to Allah, ask for forgiveness, and then commit a good deed. So it's like you've fallen and you're putting yourself back on the right track. Right? You know, sometimes like we have marathon runners and they're like running the path and then they might get off track for a bit, or they might even like leave the path, like go eat or rest or whatever, or drink water. But you have to get back on the path. Right? It wouldn't make sense for you to get off the path and then just stay there, right? So that's the intention behind this. Like you got off the path, okay, but you can come back. And the quicker you come back, the easier it is to come back, right? And the third thing he said, behave with people with good character. So like once you've rectified your own, like you've turned your sin into a good deed, now the next thing you should focus on is your character. Right? And it's amazing that he put it in this order, because your character on the Day of Judgment, your akhlaq, is the heaviest on the scale. Right? So this person who has sinned, I want you to put yourself in their mind, right? Like you committed this sin, let's say it was a big sin, and then you asked Allah for forgiveness, and then you did a good deed. Psychologically, the shift didn't happen that easily, right? It doesn't happen that easily. Like you might still be bearing the heaviness of that sin. You might still be like, okay, I did the good deed, but it doesn't feel like much. It doesn't feel enough. Compared to the sin that I committed, my good deeds don't feel enough. Like, is Allah even going to accept from me? Like, was it even done properly? Like, was I even sincere? And you feel the sense of like, how many good deeds do I have to do in order to cancel this sin, right? Like, how much will I have to do? Do I have to go to Hajj or something? Like, what if I can't afford to go to Hajj? What will I have to do, right? So the Prophet ﷺ's like, behave with good character. Because good character is not measured in number. It's measured in weight, right? So on the Day of Judgment, when you show up, it's not the number of good deeds that you had. It's the sincerity behind those deeds, right? So regardless, now he's giving you an opportunity that you have the opportunity to be a kind person. You have the opportunity to be generous. You can give sadaqah. You can, remove something harmful from somebody's way. You can give good advice. Anything that you can do that counts as good character, right, that will be heavy on your scale. So he's making the path to Allah easy for you in that sense. Okay? Okay, now going back to the chart that I had. So if you do a good deed, now the scenario is, first we talked about the sin, right? Now the scenario is that you have done a good deed. And let's say it was a huge good deed. Let's say you donated like $1,000 to the masjid. Amazing, right? Like, for average people like us, it's like a big deal, right? The default response for a lot of people who haven't worked on their heart, right? For people who are if you're not very conscious, then your mind can automatically assume that it's accepted. Automatically. Like as soon as we do a good deed, we just think like, yeah, okay, Allah accepted it. And then what we might do after that is we might relax, and then we might take other opportunities for granted. Like let's say it's Ramadan and you just gave $1,000 to the masjid, and now the next day there's another fundraiser, and you might think to yourself, I don't have to give anything because I just gave yesterday, right? Yeah. So you might think to yourself like, okay, I don't have to do anything because I just gave yesterday. So I'll just pause for a second.
So straight from the laptop, they're going to at least be able to see the presentation.
So not from here? Not here?
It's going to be here.
Oh, okay.
It should come up.
Are we going to put the thing back down or? Okay. Oh, perfect. That's, I guess, yeah. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. This is pretty slow. Okay. I'll just come to this side. All right, so the situation was that we did a good deed. Okay. So we basically did a good deed, right? And our default response was that we assumed that it was accepted, and then we relaxed. So the next time the opportunity came to give, our mindset was like, okay, but I already gave. I don't have to give again. And like practically, that might make sense, but in a spiritual realm, it doesn't make sense, because what you assumed is that your good deed was enough. You assume that your good deed saved you already. Like I already did my part of generosity. Like I was already generous yesterday. I don't have to be generous today. But in reality, even if you gave $1 the next day, who knows, maybe that dollar would be heavier for you, right? Because it depends on the sincerity. So one, you never want to assume that your deeds are automatically accepted, right? Like we talked about the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? When he was done building the Kaaba, he said, رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So it is a sunnah of the prophets to recite and to ask Allah for acceptance when they do a good deed. So we should have the same attitude. And then you don't want to take the consequent opportunities for granted. So anytime a good deed opportunity comes, you want to take that opportunity. So the response is you give thanks, because as the scholars say, the reward for good deed is more good deeds. So when Allah opens the door for you of doing a good deed, and you do it properly, Allah's going to open more doors. So it's actually a sign of acceptance. Right? Some people might ask, how do I know if my good deed got accepted? Right? So one, if you made the dua for acceptance, and then you found that Allah is continually opening doors for you to do more good deeds, that's an opportunity that He's showing you, like, okay, keep walking this path, keep coming closer to me. I'm going to make it easy for you, right? So that's the way that you know. We already did that. Okay, so today we're talking about sincerity. This is really close. Okay, so Ibn Ata'illah says that actions are lifeless forms, but the presence of an inner reality of sincerity within them is what endows them with life-giving spirit. So basically, like, our actions are empty. They're basically useless unless we have sincerity, right? There was the famous hadith of the 3 people who will be brought on the Day of Judgment, right? And Allah will call them one by one, and one of them will be a shaheed, a martyr who died in the path of Allah, right? And then Allah will ask him, like, why did you become a martyr? Why did you go to battle? Why did you allow yourself to be killed? And he's like, Ya Allah, I did it for your sake. And he will be like, actually, no, you did it so that you would be known as a martyr. And like people said that, like you died, and people talked about you. They were like, oh, this guy was a martyr, so you got your reward, basically. And then he's going to be dragged on his face to the hellfire, right? And then the second one is going to be a scholar. And then the third one is I think the qari, the one who recites Quran. So the same thing. So these three people.
What is number 2?
Scholar, like a sheikh, like somebody who had a lot of knowledge. And he was like, Ya Allah, like I did it for your sake. And, you know, I think there's one of zakat as well, but I'm not sure. So, so these three people who are called on the Day of Judgment, they basically thought they were doing something, but their intention was wrong, right? Even though they did the right thing, the action was done. Right? The person died for like he died on the battlefield. Like the other person, they taught Quran, they taught Islam, they taught all these things, but the intention wasn't correct, right? The sincerity simply wasn't there. So Allah will actually cause them to be dragged on their faces. So that's the importance of sincerity. So what he's basically saying is like, your actions are empty unless you breathe into them. So the imagery that he's using is like, you know, like when Adam alayhi salam was created, he was just a statue. Right? Like we all know the story when Adam alayhi salam for about 40 days, he was just a statue who was made of clay. But then when Allah breathed into him, that's when he became a human. That's when he had value. So he's using that kind of idea to show you that imagine your actions to be completely dead. Imagine them like they're completely empty. They're nothing. Unless you breathe into them the life of sincerity, of ikhlas, like you're purifying your heart, and then your actions come to life. Now they have something of value. Now they've become something that can help you, right? Oh, that's going backwards. Okay, so I can't even see from here. Okay, so deeds are static. They're lifeless. The only thing that brings them to light is the presence of niyyah. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith about prayer, he said, a man may return from his prayer and nothing good is written for him but a tenth of his prayer, or a ninth, or an eighth, or a seventh, or a sixth, or a fifth, or a fourth, or a third, or a half. So what he's basically saying is like, imagine your salah if it was divided up like a pie chart, right? Like how much reward are you getting out of your salah? So he's saying that some people, when they walk away from their prayer, they only got a tenth of the reward, right? Some people only got a ninth of the reward. Some people only got like fourth, fifth, whatever, or a half, right? Like depending on where their heart was. Like were they truly, did they have khushu'? Were they focused on Allah? Why were they praying in the first place? Right? Was it just kind of like, yeah, let me pray so I don't get punished? You know, like it's just a very like, just obligation, you know, or maybe they're praying because somebody wants them to pray, right? We talk about kids, but there's even adults who pray because their spouse wants them to pray, for example, right? Like, oh, my husband told me to pray, so I'm praying. My wife told me to pray. So it's like, what is the reason behind your praying? Or like, you're just in a gathering and there's a lot of people there and you don't want to look bad in front of them, so you just pray. So we have to really ask ourselves that why are we doing something? Another example that kind of comes with the quote is that there's metal, right? And a metal that contains flecks of dust or dirt cannot be considered pure. So when people who work with metal, like blacksmiths and stuff, they actually have to purify the metal first. They have to put it in fire to purify it. So similarly, Allah puts us through trials and tribulations to purify us, to purify our intention, to see if we're actually going to do it, right? So one of the ways this can show up is like, let's say you have an intention to do something good, right, for the sake of Allah, and now obstacles are coming in your way, and it's becoming harder and harder for you to do that good deed. Are you still going to do it, right? That's a way to check your own sincerity in your own heart. Like for example, let's say you want to go to Umrah, right? You make the intention to go to Umrah. And I know people always say like, when Allah wants to call you, He will call you. And other people, like no matter how much they try, they can't go. That's true, but it's like, how much did you really want to go as well, right? Like you're also rewarded according to your intention. So if you make the intention and then it doesn't work out, that's not up to you, right? You still get the reward for that, right? But the thing is, are you, like when the obstacles come, are you willing to jump over the obstacles, right? How much are you willing to jump over the obstacles when they come between you and Allah? That's an example of sincerity, right? I don't have to go there. Okay, so Dhunnun al-Masri, rahimahullah, said that all humans are dead except those who have knowledge, And all those who have knowledge are asleep, except those who do good deeds. And those who do good deeds are deceived, except those who are sincere. And those who are sincere are always in a state of worry. So this quote is also attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i, but it was actually Dhunnun al-Masri who said it. If you can see, he's going from like levels of, I guess, not being useful, like a person who's not very useful. Like dead, if you're dead, you basically have no life. So he's saying if you're going about this world without knowledge, then you're basically as good as dead. Because like just like the actions that without sincerity, they're dead. Like a person who doesn't have knowledge is spiritually dead. Like they don't really have any benefit that they can bring to themselves or to other people, right? Because dead people they can't do anything. So that's the imagery. And then those who have knowledge, it's like, okay, now you have knowledge, but if you don't do anything about it, you're like a sleeping person, right? A sleeping person is alive, they're breathing, they're still like a person, they have value, but like if you're always sleeping, what are you doing, right? You're not even awake to do anything, right? Like in Ramadan, you know how some people sleep the whole day? So what do they get out of their fast? Like they're just sleeping the whole day. They didn't do anything. They didn't read any Quran. They didn't help anybody like prepare the iftar. Like what good deeds did they accomplish? Sleeping is not haram while you're fasting, but if you're sleeping the whole day, then you're just you're not doing anything, right? Those who do good deeds are deceived. So okay, now a person's like, okay, I woke up, I'm ready to take on the day, I'm ready to do everything, I want to serve the community, I want to serve my parents, I want to do everything good, but their intention is corrupted. So they're still not getting the full benefit that they could get. And then he said those who are sincere. So now somebody might be asking themselves at this point, like, okay, how do I know that I'm sincere? How do I know that I'm actually doing it for Allah? He said you're always in a state of worry. Now this can be misunderstood because it's not talking about the worry and the anxiety that normal people say, like you're worried about life or you're worried about what's going to happen to you, you're worried about the future. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the spiritual state. You're worried about your own self. You're worried about your actions. You're worried about your intention. And you're so busy looking at yourself that you don't really have time to worry about other people. Because sincere people are serious people. Like when they commit, like when they do good deeds, they do it with a state of seriousness, and they know what they're doing. They know the weight of pleasing Allah. They know the weight of displeasing Allah. Right? It's very heavy on them. They don't just take it as like a light thing, like yeah, good deeds, bad deeds, whatever, who cares? They're very, very like focused in reaching Allah, and they want to commit these deeds with sincerity so that they can reach Him. So this quote is a different one. He says, bury your existence in the earth of obscurity, meaning like being hidden, for whatever sprouts forth without having first been buried flowers imperfectly. So there's so many different things that could be said about this, but I'm just going to go here. So he's basically saying bury your ego, not yourself as a person, but your ego, your nafs. You want to bury it, meaning you want to suppress it, you want to silence it. So if your ego was like a thing that you could touch, he's saying hide it, put it away. Don't let it come out and run the show. Like put it to the side, right? And this is the opposite of like being famous. So like there's a lot of people who want to be known by people. They want to be recognized. And on a human level, it's not always a bad thing, but it can easily become a disease of the heart. And the biggest example of this is Iblis, right? Iblis was already honored by Allah because he worshipped Allah for thousands of years, right? And Allah gave him the honor of staying with the angels. He already gave him the honor. But when Adam alayhi salam was created and Allah gave Adam alayhi salam a different type of honor, Iblis felt like he wasn't recognized anymore. The spotlight was on him, and then the spotlight moved to somebody else. So like a secure person, right, somebody who's confident in themselves and they're secure, they don't mind if the spotlight goes to somebody else, right? Because if somebody else is recognized, it doesn't mean that I lose value. But Shaitan was so weak, emotionally and spiritually, that he couldn't stand the spotlight being taken away from him. So he wanted to be recognized, and like it was basically like, I'm the only one who should be recognized. Why is Adam getting this honor? I should be the only one who gets this honor. But Allah's like trying to teach him that I already gave you the honor. Like, what more honor do you want? Right? Like, if you look at the prophets, some of the prophets have a higher degree than others, right? A higher daraja. Like the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad ﷺ, he's the highest, right? And we can say that, right? We respect all the prophets, we love all the prophets, but we know his status. It's high. None of the prophets came forward and said, well, why can't we be like him, right? Like, the prophets could have argued, they could have told Allah, they could have fought with Allah the way Iblis did, but they didn't, because their heart was clean, right? Iblis's heart was diseased. The prophets' hearts were clean, so they didn't come and argue about that. They didn't care that somebody else was being given the honor, because they already knew the honor Allah gave me, it's enough, right? I'm grateful for the honor that Allah gave me. So they accepted it, and it was okay. They were okay with whatever Allah gave them, right? They didn't want what somebody else had. So then he says, like, the soil of anonymity itself is what nurtures the seed and causes it to grow. So, like, basically, if you put your ego aside, if you like that thing inside of you that wants to be known, the thing inside of you that wants recognition, if you force yourself to put it aside, then Allah is the one who's going to cause you to grow. And by you, it means like your qalb, right? Your ruh is going to blossom. The real you, right? Because people think the ego is me, but the ego is not you. The ego is separate from you. It's actually your ruh that is you. So when you throw your ego to the side, and you suppress your ego on your own, then Allah is the one who causes you to bloom. Allah is the one who will give you that recognition in the way that benefits you, not in the way that harms you, right? And Allah knows your heart, right? So there are some people who actually will never be recognized, but it's Allah's protection for them, right? And there are some people who will go their whole lives thinking, nobody appreciates me, or nobody knows who I am, or nobody values my contributions, but it's actually Allah's protection for that person. And when they change something within themselves, then they'll finally be able to get what they need, because now Allah knows they're ready for it, right? Where Shaitan was not ready for it. Shaitan wanted everything, but Allah knew his heart that he wasn't ready for it. So yeah, then the second part is just about like, okay, you don't fall into riya. Riya is basically like you do things for other people to show off, and they basically like they don't mind if nobody knows, right? Like when they commit a good deed, when they do a good deed, they don't care if anybody knows or not, as long as they know Allah knows, right? It's enough for them. And it actually like truly fulfills them when they imagine Allah looking at them committing the deed, right? So it's a part of like spiritual maturity, that as you get older and you get wiser and you get more knowledge, that you care less about what people think and you care more about what Allah thinks, right? Okay, I'm just gonna go this out. So do the opposite of what your ego wants. If your ego wants to speak up, you be quiet. So like this applies to any gathering. Like there are some people who are super loud, they're always dominating the conversation, they have the strongest opinions, they always think they're right, and they don't give other people a chance to speak or to share. And this can be in like religious circles and non-religious circles. It's because their heart in their, like, they just don't have that. It's like if they don't speak, they feel forgotten, right? If they don't speak, if they don't constantly make themselves known, like I'm here and I have a voice, and they don't know how to be quiet. So basically what the scholars say as advice, like to their students, even one-on-one, what they say is that if you feel like you must like keep talking, like you want to keep talking, then be quiet. Shut the ego down, don't give the ego a voice, right? But if you feel like you want to be quiet, then talk. So basically if you're scared, right? Let's say there's something wrong going on, someone's rights are being taken away, there's some injustice happening, somebody's backbiting someone, and that person is not there to defend themselves, and you feel shy or embarrassed to speak up, that's your ego feeling shy. That's the nafs, right? So in that case, you must speak up, right? So you have to do the opposite of what your ego wants, and the more you do this, the stronger you become, the stronger your heart becomes, your ruh becomes, and the weaker your ego becomes, because you're not listening to it anymore, you're not obeying it anymore, right? So it's not like, you're not trying to become completely hidden in that sense, you're just trying to constantly do the right thing, right? And the story of, what time is it, by the way? Okay, so the story of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anh, I love this hadith, by the way, it's one of my favorite hadiths ever. So he said that they were sitting in a gathering, right? And the Prophet ﷺ was giving like advice, and he was giving like, you know, just to talk. And in this gathering, there was Umar radiallahu anh, there was Abu Bakr, there was Ali, there was Abdullah ibn Umar, his son. There was all these big Sahaba that we know of, that we respect, like the biggest names, right? They're all sitting with the Prophet ﷺ. And he asked them a question. He says that there's a tree and it resembles the Muslim. I'll get to that later, what that means. He said the leaves of it do not fall in the summer or winter, and it gives its fruit at all times. Like it's always fruitful. If you go, you know how most trees, like they only give fruit in like the summer or the fall, right? They don't really give fruit in the winter. But the date palm tree, actually, it's miraculous because it gives fruit all throughout the year. And Ibn Omar said, so he's narrating the story to us. So Ibn Omar is a child right now. Okay, so he's like maybe like 10, 12. And he's saying that I thought of the date palm tree, but I felt too shy to answer. Because he's a kid and he's in the presence of these big Sahaba. It's like if we were sitting somewhere and there were these big scholars, you know, mashayikh, and somebody asked a question, we wouldn't speak up because we'd be like, oh, you know, like that shaykh, he knows the answer. I don't want to say anything. I feel disrespectful, or I feel like I'm not being humble, you know? So Ibn Umar said that. And then so later, nobody gave an answer actually. Everybody was silent. Everybody was too shy to answer. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, it is the date palm tree. And then when they left, he said that, he's talking to his father, Omar. So he says, yeah, father, like, oh my father, like I knew the answer, but I didn't say it. And so he said, why didn't you speak? Right? Why didn't you speak? And he said, I thought like I was silent, like you were silent, so how could I say something? Right? They also had that respect for their parents, like, oh, if my dad's not saying anything, how can I say something? That too in front of the Prophet, ﷺ, right? And he said, had you said it, it would have been more precious to me. Like meaning as a father, I would have been proud of you, that you made me proud in front of the Messenger, ﷺ. So the lesson we learn from here is that humility does not mean to pretend you don't know, right? Humility means to have gratitude for what you know and then to speak up. God, I guess they're doing the adhan. Anyway, okay, so why did he say it resembles the Muslim? So I guess I'll just finish this point. So the reason he said that, tell me about a tree that resembles the Muslim, is because one of the lessons we extract from this hadith, which is, by the way, so many different lessons. The one we talked about was just one. But the other was that a Muslim is someone who is supposed to be beneficial to the people. Right? The date palm tree was used as an example, as an analogy by the Prophet Muhammad, because it was his habit to use examples that the Sahaba were familiar with, right? So in our time, we could use any other example, but the date palm tree is an amazing example because they were familiar with its use. They were familiar with all the different things you can do. One of the things about this tree is that it's not just the dates that are beneficial. It's the leaves of the tree, the trunk of the tree, and every single part of the tree can be used for something. It's beneficial in its entirety. There's no part of this tree that goes to waste. So it's truly like a miraculous tree. So he compared this tree to a Muslim. Not a mu'min, right, which is a higher level, but a Muslim. That means every single one of us sitting here, he's comparing to this tree. So he's saying in every season of your life, you are able to provide benefit. Right? Going back to the idea of value. You can't provide benefit if you don't have value. So he's affirming your value as a human being, as a Muslim in this world. He's saying no matter where you are, no matter what season it is, you are beneficial. You can provide benefit to somebody else. And every part of you, right? There are different skills inside of you that you have not even unlocked yet, that he's reminding you of your potential, that you can be like this tree, right? You can provide shade, metaphorical shade to the people who come. You can provide them with nourishment. You can provide them with good advice that's going to put them on the right path. You have so much inside of you that you don't even know. That's why he compared us to this tree. Okay. Just going backwards again. All right, so one more point about this hikam. So again, he said, bury your existence in the earth of obscurity for whatever sprouts forth without having first been buried, flowers imperfectly. So the idea behind this is also to trust the process, meaning if you don't bury a seed, it won't grow, right? So you have to bury yourself in order to allow yourself to grow. What does that mean? It means that you leave yourself and your life in Allah's hands, and you work on yourself in a place that nobody sees, like you're working on your character. If I'm working on my character, can anybody tell? Right? If I'm sitting here right now, like you guys are sitting here right now, if you make the intention within yourself, Ya Allah, I want to rid my heart of arrogance, or I want to rid my heart of jealousy, or I make the intention, Ya Allah, that I'm going to start doing this dhikr or that dhikr to come closer to you. Nobody sees that, right? Your intention is buried within your heart, but your intention is going to sprout forth because Allah is the one who's going to bring that result from you, right? Because you made that intention. So the thing about a bamboo tree, it's amazing, is that for 5 years, when you bury like a seed for a bamboo tree, for 5 years you won't see any growth, like nothing. And then when it decides to grow, within 2 weeks it's going to shoot up like more than 6 feet or 12 feet or whatever it is, right? Bamboos are really tall. So it's an analogy that a lot of like self-help coaches and everybody uses all the time, because you think that nothing is happening, and then one day you shoot up so high because it's the barakah, right? The work was happening underneath, right? Something was being built. You were preparing your heart. You were preparing the soil, and Allah was preparing you, right? He tells Musa alayhi salam that I prepared you for myself. I mean, those 10 years in the desert, you were doing your work, taking care of your family, livelihood, all of that. But when it's time for you to go, Allah just launched him right into the fire, right? Like metaphorical fire, to go talk to Fir'aun, right? So that was the process. Anyway, I'm going to stop because we have to pray. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay. All right, wait, yeah.